Welcome to Homeschool Conversations with Humility and Doxology. I'm Amy Sloan, a second-generation homeschooling mom of 5, and I am so glad that you are here with us today. You can find the show notes for this and other episodes where we have real-life conversations with moms and dads and other educators over at humilityanddoxology.com. And today I'm so excited to be joined by my friend, Pam Barnhill. Pam, thank you for being here.
Thanks so much for having me, Amy. This is going to be fun.
Well, Pam is the author of Better Together and Plan Your Year. She hosts the popular Your Morning Basket podcast, writes at pambarnhill.com, and is one of the co-hosts for the Scolay Sisters podcast, which is one of my favorites. You can find her speaking at homeschool conferences around the country when she's not home in the Deep South with her husband and their 3 children. Pam, I would love for anyone who doesn't know you, if you could just start by telling us a little bit about your family and how you came to homeschooling.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Amy. I really appreciate you having me on here. So I do have 3 kids, and 15 next month, which is like, I printed out the PDF of the driver's education handbook. I'm like, this is not happening, but it is. And then we have one who just turned 13, and then a little boy who is 10, the baby pulling up the rear. And so we were actually married for 10 years before we started having kids. And I was a teacher, and then I kind of got out of teaching and started working in the yearbook profession and really loved what I did. And so the plan was I was going to take a few months off, and then I was going to go back to work because I made my own schedule. I worked from home. I had a wonderful boss. It was the best job ever. So that's what I was going to do. And then I started looking at this little baby that I had, and I was like, I have no family to keep her while I go to work. And so I'm going to have to put her in the hands of strangers. And that was pretty much all she wrote. Like, I was not willing or prepared to do that. And so my family actually crowdsourced and found my husband a job. We packed up everything and moved from Tampa, where we lived, back to Alabama, where my family lived. And we've been here ever since. So that was kind of like, from that little spark right there, and having seen what I had seen in the education system with things like, I had some wonderful colleagues who were teachers, and they just loved what they did, but they complained constantly because their hands were tied through this testing system that, they were constantly having to teach to this test, and they didn't agree with the content on the test, and felt like it wasn't worthy and wasn't valid. And I didn't see that quite as much in journalism because we had a product to produce every year, and we just produced our product, but it was really evident throughout the English department and the other departments, the other teachers I worked with. And I just didn't like the testing. It's like, this is, some government entity somewhere determines that this is the stuff that's valuable to learn. And then you spend so many hours learning that you don't have time to learn anything else. And the kids are judged on the test, the teachers are judged on the test, the schools are judged on the test. And I didn't want that for my kids. So that was where it started.
Yeah, it becomes more of like producing a product than it really does about educating human beings.
Yeah, very much so. Very much so.
Well, how has your homeschooling philosophy or approach or personality or thoughts on education kind of grown and changed over the years? Because you made the decision, you had this huge life change, but now your kids are older like mine are, and I'm sure that you've changed thoughts over the years.
Well, so, it's funny because I mean, like, we could take, I could talk a whole hour just about this, seriously. But because when I came to it, I was the person who I started searching online for homeschooling online. And so this would have been like, in 2007, 2008, I had a 3-year-old, things like that. And so I was researching and looking. And so I stumbled upon Calvert, and I don't hear anybody talk about Calvert anymore. I'm assuming it's still out there. If I had been Catholic at the time, I'm Catholic now, I would have done Seton Seton Home Study. I know a lot of Catholics who do Seton. I don't know if there's still a lot of Calvert people, but like they have like your whole curriculum, like K through 12, school at home, get the box with the number on it every year and do that. And so I was like, oh, this is going to be so easy. I mean, I was a school teacher. That was what I did. And so this made perfect sense to me. I was always a really good student. I always liked school, things like that. So then I started like looking around and seeing, like following Homeschool Conversations and stuff. And guess what? It wasn't just about getting a box with a number on it. There were other homeschoolers out there who had figured out that that's not the only way to educate. And I had no idea, because that was the way that I had been taught in teachers college. That was what I had done. I was like on that school at home path when I discovered things like 5 in a row, which was unit study. Yeah. So we did before 5 in a row for quite a while. Or I started reading John Holt and found out about unschooling, or I discovered who this Charlotte Mason lady was. Had never heard of her before. I mean, they mentioned Maria Montessori in my classes. So like it just opened up a whole new world of possibilities for me. And that what I knew about education was this teeny tiny sliver of things that had been going on for like the past 150 years, but really there were thousands more years worth of people educating other human beings and ways that they had done it, different things that we could explore, different philosophies, different pedagogies, and different anthropologies behind the pedagogies, to quote James K.A. Smith. So like I started moving, I tried a little bit of everything. I seriously did. Like you could go back and find really old posts on my blog. I called us schoolers for a long time, because my personality did not tend towards unschooling, but I felt like we had to find the best way for us. And in some ways that was wonderful, but then in some ways it made me very dissatisfied and unhappy. And so I finally settled into classical homeschooling, and have really stayed there for a number of years. And now I think you would look at us and you would probably not see that we're classical purists. We're kind of back to that us schooling thing. But it's grounded in a classical philosophy that what we're doing is educating whole human beings, whole persons towards virtue. And that's what education is about, not about checking off boxes or getting a grade for a test, or even getting a job, really. So
yeah, I relate to that so much, because I also call myself, or consider myself to be a classical homeschooler. But I think a lot of people would expect then our day or the things that we do to look a lot different. And it is more about that philosophy, like you brought up, the anthropology. What do you believe makes a human? Like, what is man? What is man's chief end? And I think that's also one of the benefits of being a second generation homeschooler for me, is I kind of skipped that initial stage. I never was going to be in a box. Like I never thought that homeschooling had to look just one particular way. And so I came into it prepared to be grounded in a philosophy, but then to really have the freedom and to do what was best for our family, which I love.
Yeah, it's definitely been a journey. I mean, it really has. I could probably write a whole book. So
you should.
In my spare time.
Yes. Well, has there been anything that's been a particular challenge or maybe has surprised you about homeschooling?
So yeah, one of the particular challenges was the fact that my children are nothing like me. So it's like, I was the student. I was the kid who liked filling out the workbooks. Now I will say that my main and chief goal in my school years was to get done with my work as quickly as possible, and either convince the teacher to let me go to the library so I could find a new book, or pull out the book I was currently reading and read it. I will say that. But on the days that, I didn't have a book in hand, or they wouldn't let me go to the library, I was the kid who would like finish all my work and go to the learning centers in the back of the room and pull out the little extra things that you would read and answer the comprehension questions about, which, okay, second generation homeschooler, they have that kind of stuff in school. And I was really happy to do that. I was like, oh, I'm I'm learning new stuff. Look, and I was always the geeky kid who just liked to do well, liked to do a good job, that kind of stuff. My kids are nothing like that. Well, they're geeky, but they're not like the academically, I want to please you. And I don't know if it's maybe because they're homeschoolers. Like, would it have been different if they had gone to school? And just as homeschoolers, they're like, I know that there are people out there who have homeschooled kids who are very kind of academically focused, and I'm going to sit here and do everything, and I'm a self-starter, and I'm going to get up early. Not my kids. So it has, it kind of drove me crazy for a while that they were not. I'm like, look, you have all this freedom. I'm not asking you to do busy work. I'm not asking you to do things that are egregious, but I just want you to do this and do it well. But, they're human, they're fallen, they're sinful, they're kids, they're, so they're like, we're going to do as little as possible. And they have to be taught differently. And it's like, so that's been a struggle. And then I finally have come to the realization, probably within the past 2 to 3 years, that even though my kids don't have the same interests that I do, they have their own interests, and those interests are valid. And those interests are something that I can work with and use in their schooling, even though it's something I would have never chosen myself. And so, I don't know, we're still on a journey. I feel like by the time I graduate my last one, I might be getting good at this.
But then every child ends up being their own different person. I feel like, I finally cracked the code. I figured it out with my firstborn. Like, I've made the mistake and I've worked it out. And then the next child comes, or then the third child comes and is a totally different burden. I'm like, but I thought I had figured it out. But that's part of the fun too, is really seeing that homeschooling is not somehow creating cookie cutter children. It doesn't save our children. It doesn't make them magically going to just know all the right answers. They're still learning and growing. And that's part of the joy of parenting and getting to be with them. Like, it's the hardest part of homeschooling because you're always with them, but it's also such a joyful part to be able to walk through their growth into who they're meant to be right alongside them.
Yeah. I mean, it really does help you like grow an appreciation for other people and what their talents and abilities are, and kind of step outside of the, we often like look and see our situation and apply it to everybody else, but there's so many different situations, and I can see that in my kids. So.
Well, I want to pivot a little bit to talk about one particular topic that I know you love, and that is morning time. And I've heard you talk about Cindy Rollins as being like the mama of morning time, but I think of you as the big sister of morning time for so many of us who have listened to your podcast, your Morning Basket podcast for years, and read what you've written, and just encouraged this whole other generation of mamas to include morning time. But these are now terms that sort of get thrown around a lot. You hear morning basket, morning time, and I think some people still aren't quite sure exactly what that all means. So can you explain what you mean by morning time and how you started incorporating it into your homeschool day?
So yeah, morning time, and you're right. I mean, it's everywhere, and there are people who still haven't heard of it. It's like, the name is almost unfortunate. Like, at this point, I wish we could go back and call it something else, because like the number one thing I still hear from people is, do I have to do it in the morning? But we're not morning people. My kids don't want to get up in the morning. It's like, oh, this is so sad. But it just like, it took on a life of its own being called morning time. But really all morning time is, or morning basket, or circle time, is a time in your homeschool day when the entire family comes together and learns together. I like to say from toddler to teen, but honestly, we're going to include moms in that as well, because as well as I do that, like, we're over here having some of the most fun in morning time, learning things. And so everybody comes together, and this is a time where you're learning the same things. And it does a number of different things for your family. I mean, the first thing, just efficiency's sake, if you've ever tried to get everybody their own history book with their own number on it and like 4 or 5 different levels of history, that's just crazy making. And so if you could do that in morning time with the entire family together, it's such a much more efficient use of your time. So in addition to efficiency, the other thing that's really great about morning time is everybody is learning things together. And so what this does is it sparks really wonderful conversations for your family. Because if everybody's off learning different things in separate places all day, different topics all day, then you're missing out on opportunities to really get together and discuss just those wonderful conversations that we want to have as homeschoolers with our kids. And so it's a wonderful time to do that as well. So those are my favorite things about morning time and what I think makes it a really fabulous part of our day. And it doesn't have to be done in the morning. I mean, you could totally do it at any time of day. And, it's as you kind of dive deeper into the concept and what it looks like in each individual family, because it does look different for different families, then you get into, we have times that our teens are here and then we let them go because they have a lot of work to do. And we have seasons where it's very short because we have toddlers who are kind of, running the show and won't sit down and be quiet. And, so it never looks the same for every family, and it never looks the same from year to year in any single family. But it's totally worth doing.
I think that's so important what you just said, because I've heard people or seen people online asking questions like, am I allowed to do this in morning time? Or, well, I don't really think I can call this morning time because we don't include XYZ. We don't include nature study, or we don't include this. So I guess we're not really doing morning time. And it's so good for moms to hear that there's many seasons, there's going to be many different families, and it doesn't have to all look one particular way for it to still have those wonderful benefits of shared family memory.
Yeah. And that's it right there. That's the most important thing to remember about morning time, is that you're going to do the subjects that are important to you and your family, not the subjects that are important to the family down the street. And then you're going to, it's going to like fit your family and look like it needs to look for your family. And that's a successful morning time right there. So.
Well, you mentioned that moms secretly are having a lot of fun, maybe not so secretly, having a lot of fun during morning time. Is there anything in particular that you have especially loved incorporating in your family's morning time?
Poetry, I think, is like one of my favorite things. Memorizing poetry. I mean, I'm speaking to the choir here, preaching to the choir. I love to memorize poetry. It gives me a feeling of accomplishment to think that I can reach my age and still memorize things. And just reading all of those wonderful, beautiful words. I mean, I was an English major. I've always been a fan. But I think that that's probably one of my absolute favorite things. And then this past year, we've gotten way more into current events as my kids have gotten older. And so we've started having some really great conversations in our morning time too, around some of the current events that are coming up. And so that's a lot of fun, because my kids are reaching an age where you feel like, well, maybe they're talking less. They're reaching an age where kids would talk less to their parents, and we're opening the doors and having some of these really good conversations.
Oh, I love that. Well, if a mom is thinking, this sounds great, but where do I start? Like when someone says, where do I start with a morning basket? What do you normally like to say to them?
So the simplest way to start, the easiest way to start is seriously to get a basket. And it doesn't have to be a pretty basket. It could be a plastic bin. But there is a purpose to this. And the purpose is when you start doing this, you want to have everything all in one place, especially if you have really little kids, because you're never going to be successful with this if you're like, okay, it's time for morning time, and you have to run over to 50 different locations to find your stuff. So seriously, there's a value to a basket. And then take about 5 things that you and your kids like to do and put them in the basket. And notice that I say you and your kids like to do, because if you pick 5 totally new things that your kids have never done before just because you think they're worthy, and you stick them in the basket, they're totally new to your children, they may not like them. So put some things in there that your children like to do. So one of those things at my house is Mad Libs. I have a 10-year-old boy. I could care less if we ever do Mad Libs ever again. But he loves the Mad Libs. So I put them in there for him because that's something he enjoys doing. Put something in there that you enjoy doing. So this doesn't just become another thing that you have to do in your school day in order to check a box. Put something in there for the girl in your family. So have all of that stuff in there. And then tomorrow, sit down with your basket, take one thing out of it, open it up, do the thing. Do the Mad Libs, read a chapter, do an activity, whatever the thing is. If everybody's really happy after you've done the thing for a few minutes, pull another thing out and do that thing. And then, do a couple things, close it, put it back up. The next day, get out the basket, repeat. The next day, get out the basket, repeat. Maybe add one more thing. At some point, you're going to finish one of those resources. Take it out, put another resource in, rinse and repeat, keep going. That is the easiest way to start a morning time. I mean, so much easier than getting on Pinterest and searching, how do I do a morning time, which is like the biggest recipe for disaster.
And then you're like bringing this big laundry basket to your kids, like, kids, here's the 72 things we're going to do in morning time. And then you wonder why you burn out and don't ever do it again.
Exactly. And, and I would be remiss if I didn't tell you, we have free morning time plans on my website. You can go and download one and see if you like it at pambarnhill.com/month, just in case you need some ideas to get you started. But that's not necessarily the easiest way. I mean, some people might. I think it depends on your personality. Some people might say, let this lady tell me exactly what things to put in my basket. And other people are going to be much happier just like choosing 5 things and sticking them in there.
Yeah, and I'll make sure to have that linked up too in the show notes when this video is published. One of the things I love about you is you're just very relatable. You're not trying to pretend like it's this elite, always very perfect thing. And so one of the quotes you said one time, and this is my paraphrase, but you said that morning time isn't always like, with your pinkies in the air, this very proper tea time. And, to hear that like one of the queens of morning time doesn't have a perfect morning time is such a relief, I think, to many of us who are just in the trenches with kids yelling and fighting and somebody just tumbled off the back of the sofa. So first of all, is that really okay for it not to be, Instagram worthy? And then what are some strategies for dealing with just the realities of life with kids?
Yeah. Okay. So that quote, I was even thinking about the fact that we kind of get in our head sometimes as homeschoolers, especially as Charlotte Mason and classical homeschoolers, that things like this are all very Victorian looking, there's a lot of chintz and fireplaces and hot chocolate and, everybody's snuggled up and it's, or we're doing something really highbrow. And going back to my Mad Libs, right now we're doing Dungeons and Dragons Mad Libs. We've done Pug Mad Libs, Doctor Who Mad Libs. We do have Shakespeare Mad Libs, but that's not the kids' favorite. So, it's not very Victorian looking. We're very modern in our morning time. And I think that's an important thing for families as they're looking at this concept and all the pretty baskets and all the flowers. And yeah, I'm guilty of taking those pictures. It just looks so much better on Instagram to have the pretty stuff, but we're very modern, in what we're doing. And you're right. The other thing is, one of the worst things about my house is the fact that there's no wall to put the couch against. It just sits out in the middle of the room. And how many times, if I had $1 for every time my youngest child has vaulted over the back of that couch, I would never have to work again a day in my life. I mean, seriously. And in morning time, they like to go lay on the back of the couch. But there's only one couch, right? And so then I have 2 boys And sometimes there's a fight over who gets to lay on the back of the couch. And sometimes one of them lays down and the other one just lays on top of him. And so then I have to stop what I'm reading or stop what I'm doing and, yell at them, hey, you need to stop. You need to. So just for tips, one of the things I would say is I have found that my kids have always done better if we sit at the table. I think one of the images that we have in our mind in morning time is kind of the mom on the couch and all of her little chicks gathered around her. Never worked really all that well for us. And so I would tell families that if you've tried this and it hasn't worked, you were sitting in a living room, maybe move it to a table and see. Now that doesn't mean, like I said, my kids sometimes end up stretched out across the back of the couch. When they were little, they would end up on the floor with a puzzle or something like that. They're always doing something with their hands. We've gone through great stretches of time in our school where the kids were begging to do morning time because they had some kind of project they were working on, and so they're like, well, I want time to work on my project here, and she's going to give me the time to do that during the school day if I let her do this morning time thing.
Sneaky.
So we've had big periods of time where that was going on, but always doing something with their hands. And then, other families tell me exactly the opposite. Like we tried doing morning time sitting around the table and it didn't work. Maybe they had a bunch of little boys who need to be playing in the floor or something like that. So they were better served by moving it away from the table. So if it's not working, one of the main tips that I give is try changing your location to see if the opposite location will work better for you. And you'd be amazed at what a difference it could make. So
that is so smart. And also realizing back to the earlier part of our conversation with changing seasons as, ages and personalities are changing over the years. Something that worked last year or maybe even last month, if you're suddenly coming up against resistance, something as simple as just trying a different location could kind of restore morning time back when you're having trouble.
And a lot of times I'll tell people, like, if all of it, it seems like all of a sudden it's probably been coming on longer than what you think. But if you get to a point where your morning time's not working and you're like, whoa, wait a second. Like a couple months ago, this was working great and it's not working now. What's the deal? You've probably let it get too long. It's probably, because you're going along and you're feeling good and you're like, oh, I can keep putting more and more in here. This is fabulous. And then all of a sudden it's not working. That's when, you go back and you look, well, when it was working, we were only doing 30 minutes of morning time. And now it's taking us about 45. Probably the thing you need to do is to back it off to 30 minutes. And you can do that without giving up some of the things you enjoy doing by incorporating some loop scheduling.
My favorite.
It allows you to get more things done in less time. And so, that's something that you could do to take it back. But I think just paying attention to those kinds of things, because if your kids were enjoying something and it was working, there's got to be a reason why it's not anymore. And as for the seasons, your morning time is probably going to be shorter when you have younger kids in your house. There's going to be kind of a golden age of morning time where you have a lot of those. Maybe your youngest is 4 or 5 and your oldest is middle school. You have a lot of time together to do some things. If you can, I know for some larger families, they never fully fit into that little container right there. My family did for quite a while. And then as you get teens on the other end, then it's probably going to get shorter again, because they're going to have a lot of outside responsibilities and things like that. So
in our family this year, we've actually kind of incorporated both things. So we have what I call circle time at 8, and that's just with the younger 3. And we're doing our read alouds. We might do some of their writing stuff and narration, different things just for the younger 3. And then what I call our morning time. I mean, it's really all kind of morning time, but we just call it 2 different things because it makes it simpler. So then at 9, the older 2 come in and we just have a very short, 20, 30-minute time where everyone's together.
Yeah.
And that has worked really well. It's okay for me to have broken it up a little bit. There's still the time where everyone's together, but the older ones don't have to sit there through that whole younger time.
Yeah, and your older kids probably really appreciate the fact that you're not trying to mix it all up, and so that's what makes it work is like embracing that kind of flexibility. So
Thank you so much for coming and chatting with us today. Pam, if people want to find you online, where can they find you?
they can find me at pambarnhill.com. Everything is over there, all the Your Morning Basket stuff. And then you can find the podcast on iTunes and Stitcher and all of those different places.
Wonderful. And I'll have all those links up in the show notes at humilityanddoxology.com. I will talk to you later, Pam.
Thanks for having me, Amy.
Thanks. Bye.